going on? Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of WrestleCinema. As always, I'm your host, Joe. Thank you for listening. Episode 7 of the pod. To think, this WrestleCinema has been many of different things. We were originally Project Kayfabe, then we went to Strictly Nonsense, but we found our stride with WrestleCinema. We found the niche, but at the same time, maybe not fully found our stride yet, since we're kind of a bi-weekly podcast. Sometimes we turn into a monthly podcast, but the goal is to get on track, to be uploading regularly so we can get back into the swing of things and have more content on all of our platforms. But for anyone listening, I appreciate you. I thank you. It is just anyone who's willing to listen to me, I thank you. Welcome to WrestleCinema, episode 7. We're talking about the Mr. McMahon documentary. This was originally supposed to come out last week, but then I lost power in half of my apartment, and then I just got super busy. But we're here. We're talking about it now. Mr. McMahon Netflix documentary finally came out. We've heard about a Netflix documentary, I feel like back in 2021. And, the closer as things, as the time came on, people were like, oh, is this actually going to happen? And then when the allegations came out, we're like, oh, that's going to be a crazy documentary. And I have my opinions. I have my thoughts. I will let you all know that. But thank you again for listening. As always, you could find us on social media at WrestleCinema on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, you name it, we got it. If you want to find any of my own personal stuff, because I'm always tweeting about wrestling, movies, you name it, at the homie Joe Bro. I'm also on Twitch. I've been streaming a lot this past week. Sure, I've had time to do the podcast when I think about it, but I've been obsessed with the new Dragon Ball game that came out. Dragon Ball Sparking Zero has been so much fun. If you grew up playing any Dragon Ball game, if you are a fan of the franchise, if this is something from my childhood, that's what this is. And to have it now, and it's just so good. It's so challenging. I'm loving it. So I've been streaming a lot. Follow me on Twitch at the homie Joe Bro. You could see content there for, if you're interested in gaming. I got that stuff. Also on YouTube, I've been popping up with videos here and there. More videos to come. Also on WrestleCinema, we're doing gaming-related content there, too, when it comes to the wrestling video games. I just played SmackDown Shut Your Mouth for the very first time, so I uploaded a bit of the highlights from my stream onto the WrestleCinema channel, but we plan to have some actual wrestling content within movies in there, maybe some quick reviews, not the reviews that we do here on the pod, but if you ever wanted to find the pod on YouTube, it's available there. It's available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, you name it, we're there. So thank you so much again for following. Some housekeeping before we go on. I know we've been a little bit inconsistent with the pod as of late as life has gotten busy, but we will be having some more weekly episodes coming soon. If you stay towards the end of the episode, you'll know exactly what we're watching next week. Okay, so with all that being said, let's get into the Mr. McMahon Netflix documentary. So the Netflix documentary on Mr. McMahon released on September 25th, 2024. So kind of like 2 weeks ago at this rate. It released on the day of AEW Grand Slam, funny enough. And yeah, I listened to or watched the first 2 episodes on my way to work and on my way to AEW. And then I was able to catch up with it all, towards the end of the week. In crazy stuff, obviously. If you're familiar with what has happened with Mr. McMahon over the last couple of years, it is touched on a bit in this documentary. But to anyone that hasn't listened, but I think if you're watching or listening to me right now, you probably did listen to or watch the show. If you're tapped into wrestling as much as I am, or it's like it's almost you're living, you're breathing it, it's everything you consume, kind of, you already knew what this documentary is about. This didn't teach you anything new. That's my biggest takeaway from this documentary. There was nothing truly new that I walked away with, and I was like, oh, that really shed some light on things, because the documentary pretty much focuses on the creation of, the empire that is the WWE that Mr. McMahon created. And it tries to focus on who he is. But the biggest thing is that it's this issue of Mr. McMahon is the wrestling character that he created, but Vince McMahon, those two, Vince McMahon is the person, the human being, but those two are so blended and interconnected. That's kind of what this documentary is really highlighting, that, okay, how do you separate the art from the artist kind of deal is what's going on here. And if you're a pro wrestling fan, if you've been in touch with wrestling, if you keep up with it as much as like I do or some of our listeners do, you knew everything that was discussed here on this documentary. As I mentioned before, nothing was truly new here. And obviously, one of the biggest topics that's been revolving around Mr. McMahon is him departing WWE, from there, retiring because of the allegations of sexual misconduct that he's had over the last couple of years. Unfortunately, for those looking to consume a different kind of content, a new content about what happened, this isn't really that, because a lot of a lot of this documentary takes place between 2021, 2022. A lot of the people that were interviewed before a lot of these allegations came out. They do come back in 2024 to talk a little bit about stuff that's happened, or, just opinions on Vince McMahon in 2024. But a lot of it is really much taking place before everything that came down. And if you're not aware, if you're somehow listening to this and you're like, what did Vince McMahon do? Well, he apparently abused his power so much. He abused, apparently, allegations, of course, but nothing is fully, he's not set. There's court dates and whatnot. There's still a big investigation, but there are many allegations against him of, taking advantage of women because of his power, sex trafficking in a way, passing women along, for business in the business, just crazy stuff. And I'm not going to fully go into detail about it. The documentary touches on it here and there. And for example, the biggest one that's really shook the foundation of what Vince McMahon has been doing this last couple of years in the creation and, just being the owner of WWE and the one in charge of it all, Janelle Grant, all the stuff involving her is what really like broke the camel's back, the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of him officially retiring. Of course, then he came back, then he sold the company, but it's all the Janelle Grant stuff, and I don't really want to go into full details about it, but you could read the entire, submission, or I don't even know, the report that was done in the courts about her testimony of what he did to her. Uh yeah, just a doozy. It's this topic. The topic's in the Netflix documentary, even a little bit within this podcast. It's not for anyone. If you've ever had any form of abuse, this is just not good to really digest. But man, let's try and stay away from that for now. We'll touch on everything else. I had my initial thoughts were like, okay, this isn't truly for me. This is for people who maybe don't know much about the world of pro wrestling and who is the face behind it all back in the creation of it to, to now. And while Vince McMahon isn't a part of it, quote unquote, anymore, he's still a big integral part of how everything came to be. I mean, think about it. They showcase they showcase how Vince McMahon Sr. was the one who obviously had the WWF, and then Vince McMahon Jr., he wanted it from his dad. He wanted to, continue the family business. And Vince Sr. was like, no, I don't want this. I don't want this for you. But inevitably, Vince McMahon, that we all know, he makes a deal with his dad. He's like, all right, I'm going to buy this from you and we're going to do payments. If I'm ever late on a payment, you get to keep all the money that I've given you and you get your company back. So then Vince McMahon Sr. sold it to him, and here we are today, pretty much. And Vince McMahon, that we all know, he got his opportunity just because Vince Sr. didn't want to pay an announcer, a ring announcer, commentator, fair wages. The guy wanted a raise, and Vince McMahon Sr. was like, no. So then he needed somebody to fill in, and that's when he got his son, and that's where we are today. I wonder, imagine if that guy didn't want a raise, or if Vince McMahon Sr. did give him a raise. Would the WWE exist today? Would WCW still be around? You know, a lot of things in the world of pro wrestling. How would pro wrestling be today? Would it be just not as big as it has been? You know, right now it's a $1 billion company. That with the UFC, which is something we'll talk about in a bit. Just a whole giant, world that is pro wrestling maybe would have never existed if Vince Sr. never gave him that chance. Um, we have a lot of people that do speak in this interview. We have Dave Meltzer from the Wrestling Observer talking about it because I did not know how in touch he was. Like, they show a clip of him back in the day with long hair. I'm like, that's Dave Meltzer? No way. That does not look like him. I was shocked to see it, to say the least. But Dave Meltzer, known wrestling reporter. We have the immortal and known racist Hulk Hogan. Still bothers me so much that this man is a racist because he led the golden age. He led the WCW to the Monday Night Wars and took WCW to new heights. And yet, he is a racist. So then it takes away so much. But hey, him ruining TNA is another reason why I don't like him. But anyway, Hulk Hogan is here. One of the biggest glazers of Vince McMahon in this show. And if you don't know what glazer means, he was blowing this man so hard throughout the documentary. It's kind of crazy. I mean, I get it. He helped make you who you are. Hulk Hogan does not exist without Vince McMahon. Literally. It's just, without the power of Vince, Hulk Hogan never would have been who he is. And we have Bruce Pritchard, another guy just gobbling, playing with the balls. It was crazy to hear. At one point at the end of the documentary, closer towards the end, we're in 2024. Because as I mentioned before, the documentary takes place around 2021, 2022 for most of the interviews. And then they have some of the people come back in 2024. Bruce Pritchard is one of them. And he is so upset. He's like, the guy behind the camera, the guy asking the questions is like, hey, what did you think of the documentary so far? And he's like, I don't like it. You guys, it was an attack on Vince. You guys didn't show that he's a human. This was an attack piece, which honestly, not truly, in my opinion. They're just telling it how it is. I'm sure when all the allegations came out, they wanted to make it even more of a piece where they're like, look at how horrible this man is. But a lot of what Vince says kind of puts him in that situation. We have one point, and this is the thing. The man is being, sued. He's being put in the courts. He left his job for sexual assault allegations. And he has, at one moment, he talks about there's like two brains, two heads to Vince McMahon. There's the one head that's strictly business, that's trying to do everything, that's, a workaholic. And then there's the second head that just wants to have fun. So then the guy behind the camera is like, "Oh, what's fun?" He's like, "Oh, something sexual." I'm like, "Dude, you're in your 70s and you're just talking like this." I'm like, "Jeez." And if there's anyone that's out there, it's like, I don't think he did it. I think, these people are just coming out of the woodworks to try and ruin him. No! I mean, just look at this man, the way he acts. Oh my god. So anyway, they brought out Bryan Alvarez, they had Stone Cold, they had Undertaker, John Cena, Trish Stratus, Stratus, there you go. They had so many people on this documentary to talk about Vince, and no one truly said anything bad. The worst maybe came from like Bret Hart, but that's just because Bret Hart was so pissed about the Montreal screw job, which some people still argue, is that true or not? I mean, that's not the conversation here today. Let's talk about some other things that were mentioned in here. Um, it talks about, in the very beginning of the first episode, we do get mention of the anonymous email that tipped off the Journal about $3 million in hush money that were, sent to people, to shut up about what happened to them with Vince. And I thought it was interesting that apparently in this email that was sent to this reporter, it says like this is just like you're not even scratching the surface yet, and that's eventually when we do get the Janelle Grant stuff that happened, and that inevitably gets discussed in like the last episode. They start the show as if I didn't already mention, they kind of start the episode, the first one, saying like, "Hey, a lot of these people were interviewed before everything went down." So interesting. Another part that I'm like, Vince definitely did horrible things. It's kind of obvious. You don't have to be there to know with all the allegations against this man. Um, at one point, I have the quote here. He goes, "I wish I could tell you the real stories because holy shit." And then with a crazy smile at one point, he's like, because the guy behind the camera is like, "Oh, I want you to tell us." He's like, "Oh, I can't. I don't want anyone to know the real me." Um, that's alarming, because he's talking about that it was, the real stories that he can't tell anyone about because holy shit, and he doesn't want anyone to know the real me. You're not, and I'm sure someone like maybe Bruce Pritchard would be like, "Oh, see, they cut it up. That's why. It sounds bad like that when the way they edit it." But I don't know, man. I don't know. If this guy was innocent, I don't know if he'd be saying things like this. Ah, man. The documentary talks about his influence on America, which it is true. Wrestling back in the day was huge. Wrestling is finally getting popular again, with not only WWE but the AEW and independent wrestling. Wrestling's getting big again, in the movies, and it'll probably never get back to the way it was with the Attitude Era or, back with the Hulk Hogan on top. But wrestling, this is the company's making more money than it's ever have. I mean, inflation probably definitely plays a part of it, but he does have an influence on America. At one point, it felt like I think episode 5 or half of 6, almost half of that was dedicated to Donald Trump in a way and his involvement, obviously, with the like WrestleMania 2 and 3. Linda being in his cabinet. He's a Hall of Famer. The Vince McMahon WrestleMania 23 match with the hair versus hair. The one angle where technically Donald Trump bought WWE. I mean, he was all over there. And then, of course, boom, President of the United States. The former President of the United States, current Republican nominee for president, is a WWE Hall of Famer. Just think about that. Yeah. Some interesting. Let's. We're going out of order as we talk, but this is just my opinions and how what I want to talk about for anyone who's listening and my piece of it all. I do think they didn't focus on it enough. Was his relationship with his father and the stepfather and the mother, which is kind of crazy. So the stepfather apparently abused him and possibly sexually, and maybe the mother too. It was a bit confusing. Maybe I'm reaching. um and then there's the father dynamic, his actual father, that for some reason he didn't meet until he was about 12 years old, which is crazy. And then he's just in his life after being gone for 12 years, and they don't really focus on that. And Vince Sr. is a tough love, old school dad where he's like kind of just not even looking at his son as a son, but more as like just another person, and doesn't really show him love. And Vince never really heard he was proud of him, like it's one of those kind of deals where it's like the old school mentality from this parent is what really kind of, from the abuse he went through and never being loved enough, kind of maybe leads to the monster that he's here. And I'm not putting this as an excuse, but you kind of see why he became the man he is, because his family dynamic really screwed him up, and he just, you know, he just never became a normal person. And there's another part, as someone who is very familiar with this concept and the idea, and I've thought about this plenty of times, but it's the notion, the idea that abusers become abusers. Vince doesn't agree with that, and I don't necessarily agree with it fully either. But someone who has abused can abuse in a way. There's a lot of trace there. You can look at a lot of the people who do end up abusing, like women, children, adults who become horrible people. Sometimes there's, it just has happened to them, and then they kind of do this in a way of, I always compare it to, hurt people hurt people. Vince doesn't believe that at all, but when you look at him with these allegations and looking at his past of what happened to him, there is a little bit of a connection there. So his childhood really kind of reflects onto the man he became, which is, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate he was never loved enough. It was unfortunate that he went through what happened to him, because look at the man he became. He became a super workaholic, and he was always going to work hard, but that work hard mentality couldn't overcome the fact that there was a deep-rooted problems with this man, and look at what he ended up doing, allegedly. But I don't know. I'm not looking at the alleged part as much as more of like, there's too much of a track record. For example, they touch on the first female referee who claimed that Vince McMahon in a cab or in a car tried to, make her have sex with him, and he ripped her jeans and really tried to get at her, and he just said, no, this is a bold-faced lie. You have, a woman at a tanning salon who's here to, help people get tan, just doing her job. You have her saying Vince showed her unsolicited naked photos of him. And there's obviously the Janelle Grant stuff. There's apparently a wrestler who received like $8 million to, stay shut and not say who she was. And that's the thing. There's so much to this, of so many allegations against this man. It's like, all right, when are we going to say these are not allegations? Just say, yes, this happened. Another piece that I'm like, what the hell? He says this and just gets away with saying this? And it's like, you don't think this is the guy who did this? At one point, I think it was about the female referee, he mentions the statutes of limitation and how, like, at one point they expired after a while. So, like, certain things, like, he can't get in trouble for anymore, essentially. Crazy to bring that up. Just insane. It's just bonkers that this could be mentioned. What else? An interesting portion of it, CTE gets brought up. CTE gets brought up with Chris Nowinski. The man who was a former wrestler, but then got one too many concussions and was like, nope, I can't do this anymore. Decides to become, a doctor and research into all of this. And of course, with the conversation of CTE in pro wrestling, Chris Benoit then becomes a topic, and they talk about the death of Chris Benoit. It also coincides a lot with Vince McMahon, because the angle where Vince McMahon pretends to have died, it also lines up with when Chris Benoit actually did the things that he did. And I won't really go over that, but besides the fact that, they talk about that they were able to do research on his brain, and they learned that, for being a 40-something-year-old man, he had, like, the brain of a 70-year-old with the CTE, and, like, because of what Chris Benoit did is what really was able to help push the research done for CTE and everything else afterwards. Stone Cold at one point talks about how he's not a CTE guy, kind of like saying he doesn't believe in it. Similar to that, they talk about WrestleMania 30 with Undertaker. Obviously, if you know about that, that's when Undertaker lost. That's when the streak finally ended. They talked about the importance of the streak, and they talked about, I think I always in my head thought that Undertaker was like, yeah, like I wanted Brock to always beat my streak. No, apparently the day of at WrestleMania, Vince tells Taker, like, hey, we're putting Brock over. I think this is what we're going to do. Undertaker does it. The match went for about like maybe 25 minutes or so, 30, who knows. In the first 5 minutes of this match with Brock Lesnar, Undertaker is concussed, and then he says he does not remember the rest of the match. About like 20 plus minutes, he does not remember. And it's obviously because he has a concussion. Vince McMahon at one point is like, oh yeah, he didn't remember it because it was such a traumatic experience. You like my Vince voice? But anyway, traumatic experience is why he's saying Undertaker doesn't remember the one of the most important matches in his career. That's not because of the CTE or because of the concussion. It's because of the traumatic moment it was. Crazy to say that. Anywho, what else is mentioned? Shane McMahon is mentioned. Shane McMahon, the relationship overall between him and Vince, but then also they touch on his relationship with Linda, which before I go into Shane, I'll talk about that. Obviously, he's been with Linda for years now. They've been happily married for years. Vince was like 19 and met her when she was like, 16 or 14? It was some crazy age. I was like, whoa, that's kind of gross. Some crazy age. But anyway, they've been together forever, and he says he's happily loved her. Only person he's ever loved, which is not true. He loves himself and the world of pro wrestling way more. They talk about an article that he did with Playboy where he talks about having, cheating on his wife so much, and he was sleeping with so many women, and he regrets it. But we all know he had to have continued it. I mean, with allegations coming out of events from 2022, yeah, he did not stop. He did not. So yeah, interesting there. They talk about the Stephanie stuff. Which is obviously, the one part he mentions, the storyline he had where Stephanie was going to be pregnant and somehow he was going to be the father. Crazy. Nuts. Insane. Arrest this man. Put this man behind bars. This is not cool. That's a story he thought because it would be, crazy television. No, that's not cool. Not cool at all. What else? This is how much he loves the business. Stephanie and Triple H officially get married in like 2005, 2006. Vince really, really, really wanted the wedding to happen live on WWE television. And she was like, no. Stephanie's like, we're not doing this. And Vince like, you're selfish. You're selfish. He was not happy that she decided not to do it. Insane to just overall batshit crazy is the best way to describe Vince McMahon. So they talk about Shane and how Shane really wanted to, be the next one. He wanted to take over the family business. And just like Vince's father before him, Vince told Shane no, and he would just knock him down and, put over Stephanie more, and really enjoyed Stephanie being the business, it seemed like, more than he liked Shane. Apparently Shane was, and some people said it, I think Tony Atlas, who had the craziest fit ever with the cut-off shirt, the cut-off button-down, but he's like, yeah, like, Shane is too nice to be here. If you're too nice, they take advantage of you. Stephanie, no, she's not getting taken advantage of. She's basically Vince with the way she holds herself. But yeah, Shane wanted to run the business. He wanted to buy it from his dad in like 2009 or something. And he had like an idea or something. Vince said no. He wanted to do like a certain angle. Vince said no. And that's when Shane realized he's never going to get anything here. And that's when he decided to leave. And he did his own stuff. And he came back in 2017 when Vince was like, hey, I got a great idea for a story you want in. And then Shane came back in 2017 and was pretty active for like the next 2 years or so, and then would show up here and there. I mean, he was more of a performer than anything else, is what they kind of made it seem in the documentary. But poor Shane just always wanted to, he said he would do the craziest things. And, we've seen the stunts Shane has done, going through the King of the Ring glass and landing on his noggin multiple times. They replayed it in the documentary. And just the way his head hits the concrete shakes me to this day. Like, that sound was, like, just, you ever hear a bowling ball hit the ground? It just sounded just like that. Or when a bowling ball hits another bowling ball. Oh my god, that was so gross. They talk about that. They talk about him jumping off Hell in a Cell. Hey, he just jumped over anything. And people would say, like, maybe he was just trying to, show to his dad, like, look, Dad, like, look at me. Look what I do for you. Just wanted to hear the, I'm proud of you moment. And apparently he did get it at that WrestleMania match he had in 2017. But poor Shane, and it seems like Shane loves the business so much, which makes me think it would be insane and so cool if Shane McMahon did go to AEW. First of all, it would be cool because I love when wrestling does out-of-this-world things. That's such an out-of-the-world thing in the wrestling landscape. But also, what a way for competition right there. Yeah, I'm leaving the WWE and I'm going to the competitor in real life, not just a story or anything. No, I'm there. And I think AEW would really benefit from a McMahon. They got the nice McMahon if this does happen. And hey, we saw the photo with Shane and the Young Bucks like a couple days later after the documentary. Like a month or two ago, we saw that leaked photo of Tony Khan and Shane McMahon meeting, which also crazy. Whoever leaked that, go to hell. Tony, if you knew who leaked that, or if that was like a thing that you wanted to do, or maybe this is part of the plan, I don't know. But if this wasn't a part of the plan, that's how you scare people away. If shit like that gets leaked, yeah, Shane McMahon might be like, no, never mind, I'm not working here if this can get out. Anywho, documentary. There's just so much talking about things that we already knew. But at the same time, when you just hear this man himself kind of talking about it and like saying the things about there's two sides of him, the sexual one, whatnot, that's just absurd. Just the trauma part about CTE, crazy again. Still to this day, I think one of the craziest things ever is when the allegations came out before the Janelle Grant stuff. I think it was the hush money, the first time they mentioned hush money in like 2022, when first it was when Shane, I'm losing words here, sorry. First, 2022, when the first amount of hush money was mentioned, they had on SmackDown, they were like, oh, Vince McMahon's going to come out, he has a big, announcement. And Shane and Vince came out just to be like, hey, welcome to SmackDown, and kind of like in a way to say like, fuck you to all the allegations coming about him at that point. And then when the Janelle Grant stuff came out, that's when he officially retired. And they had Stephanie come out on a SmackDown to be like, my dad retired. I love him so much. And you had the crowd saying, thank you, Vince. Thank you. Crazy. Like, no, that is not something you do. But they did it. And it's crazy to think when Vince retired, but then he was still a part of the board, and then he came back to the board. Stephanie was, had a position of power, and then she left when Vince was announced that he was coming back. So clearly she didn't want to deal with that mess. And who would? Because what in the world? I don't know what the relationship is anymore between any of the McMahons and Vince. I mean, that's their father. Would they... I don't know. It's one of those things. Can you still love a horrible man or an alleged horrible man, quote unquote? And in my head, I'm like, how much did they know? How much did they know? Crazy, crazy stuff. That's kind of all I have to say about the documentary. This is the first Vince McMahon documentary, I think, of many. I think as the trial, as the case goes on about this sexual assault, I think we'll hear more about him and what happened. Vince McMahon, maybe also, he's getting to that age where just one day, he could pass. Vince could pass, and maybe that's when a lot more of it comes to play. But wow, Vince McMahon, he is 79 years old, and he is one of the most craziest men to ever live. And I think there's still more to come from this, and I think there's always a chance maybe he fucking comes back. Who knows? This is wrestling. Never say never in the world of pro wrestling. But that's been WrestleCinema. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate anyone just taking the time to come and listen to my podcast. I know I've had maybe some coworkers that have listened. I know I've had some new friends listen. I appreciate anyone that just wants to hear me rant about pro wrestling. But don't worry, and I've been saying this the last couple episodes, it's just been hard to really narrow down who I want to have as a guest on my show. But we will be having guests that aren't just like my friends. I plan to get some people here that maybe in the world of wrestling, maybe just in the world of, life that people love pro wrestling and they do some other cool stuff in between. We'll get them on here. Next week we will have a show. It is October, which means it is spooky season here in WrestleCinema. We are going to be talking about some horror movies, some wild wrestling movies in the horror, scary category, Halloween category. We'll talk about some stuff in our next episode, and I plan to implement some more segments. Right now, we just did a little review on the Vince McMahon doc, but we have more in store. Don't worry. As always, follow the content at WrestleCinema. Anywhere you get your podcast, you'll find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, you name it, we got it. And then, of course, if you wanted to see any of my other content, like gaming or other movies I talk about, follow me at the homie Joe Bro on all social media platforms. With that being said, I hope you take care, and we'll be back next week. I promise.